Well, welcome back to Inside Look. It's time for us to go back and look at New York. We had that big incident at the start of race 3, big crash, unfortunately involving 3 teams. So we're going to try and take a look at why it happened, what caused that incident there, and then what are the ramifications going forward. What can the league learn from this? What are the changes that are going to be implemented as we look ahead to Halifax? So plenty to dive into. Let's go and take a look at that crash.
At the moment, if they can get the acceleration correct, Italy and Switzerland at the bottom of the line are going to struggle to keep themselves back on the start line. All about acceleration now.
Good pressure in 5.
Oh, brilliant by Rick Kyle. There's going to be a pile-up in the pack there. Wow.
Oh, look at that.
No, we've had a big pile-up.
Collision.
Oh, well, I mean, what an incident that was. Pretty scary. A lot of complexity in it. And, well, who better to join me and try and take us through it than Chief Umpire Craig Mitchell. Craig, I mean, what an incident that was. It was pretty full on. There was a lot happening in there. How did you see it in the umpire booth?
Yeah, it was a very difficult incident, very tricky, and there's a couple of parts to it. There's the part 2 on the water, and where we get to a penalty, you know, who broke that rule, windward, leeward, and then there was the incident, and then there was contact and damage, and so then we go into what we call Rule 14 hearings, you know, who could have avoided contact and who couldn't have avoided contact. And so, yeah, it's quite a complicated situation, really.
Yeah, it did look complicated. So, Craig, we're coming into the start. We've got the US, we've got the Brazilians, and we've got the Italians. Now, the Italians were a little early, weren't they? So they're coming into it. Talk us through it from a rules perspective. Italy turn up. What happens from that moment on?
Yeah, so, you know, like you say, the 3 boats everyone approaching the line to start. Italy a little bit earlier, and so looking to try and kill time. And, you know, so the way they're going to do that is they're going to turn up. They are the leeward boat. You know, they can turn up. When they do turn up, they've got to give room to others to keep clear. You've also got USA coming in. They, you know, were clear ahead of Brazil. Brazil then gained an overlap on them, and so then the relationship changes. So USA now become a keep clear boat, and they've got to start acting to keep clear. And then down to leeward there, Italy just, you know, they keep on turning, and the boats get closer. There was no real response from USA. You know, they're obliged as the windward boat to keep clear. No real response there, and then the boats all came together, and there was a big crash. So on the water, during the race, the umpire found that USA didn't keep clear as a windward boat, and so they were penalised. So they get an on the water penalty, which went from a penalty loss into a disqualification because 2 of the other boats in the incident were not able to continue racing. So we disqualified USA. So that's the part 2 taken care of. We then look at it and go, well, who could have avoided contact? And that's getting into having what we saw, Rule 14 hearing. And so we do that during the broadcast window because often, you know, we need to get an outcome by the end of the broadcast. Mostly because you know that you know, with the points adding up, this could make a difference as to who goes into the final. So we need to make sure that we've made these decisions. And so we had a decision that came out that we said USA could have avoided contact, and so they break Rule 14. You know, and so then we start looking at penalty points for them. We also then look at Italy and say, well, you know, was it reasonable for them to avoid a contact? And as they're turning up, you know, and as the boats are getting closer, there is an opportunity there for them to look at the situation and say, you know, they could have avoided contact. And we decided that, you know, they could well have avoided contact. You know, 3 seconds to go. As you get closer, you go, oh, the guys to windward are not doing anything, and we should then turn away in order to avoid that contact. And we didn't feel that Italy did that. And so we then gave points to Italy as well, because we felt that they had also broken Rule 14. We then looked at Brazil and said, well, you know, what could they have done? You know, they had an overlap with USA, and so they were sailing as if they can reasonably expect that another boat will comply with the rules. So they're expecting USA to go up. 4 seconds to go. Italy's still turning right for another 40 degrees. And so they all come together. So it's kind of the perfect storm of above. You have USA, didn't turn up. You have below, Italy, they do turn up. And so, what else could Brazil do? There was a bit of discussion in there about other things that maybe they could have done. Could they have turned down? Should they have bailed out earlier, or should they have gone into a nosedive to stop the boat? And that was all discussed within the hearing.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, it's sort of when you watch back on the onboard cameras there, what's quite interesting to see is we were 5 people on the boat, and there's actually no one at the back of any of the. Well, Brazil actually had Paul Goodison in the left-hand pod, so he would have had pretty good visibility, but we didn't actually have any visibility, obviously, on the US and on the Italian boat. Both the sort of strategists were up in the grinding position, and so I don't know whether anything's kind of come out about what the crews felt on board as to what led to that incident. Because from off it feels like it's pretty hard for the driver to be looking at the software for the start, trying to gauge the boats up to windward of them, and then judging where that start line is, other boats around. You kind of need your head on a swivel, don't you? And it feels to me like perhaps having that visibility wasn't quite prioritized enough.
Yeah, and it's fundamentally, you need to keep a good lookout in order to be able to avoid contact. And there was one person less on the boat, and so teams prioritizing that lookout person, or are they prioritizing the performance of the boat? We look at it and say, well, you need to make sure that you're keeping a good lookout, and didn't feel that had happened. And that's why, and so now we're looking at potentially bringing in a rule that says, a requirement to make sure that teams, do put a person in place, at the back of the boat there, whether it's, they're staying behind the wheel, or whether they're, just attached to that aft jackstay, to make sure that they have someone in place that will be able to keep a good lookout.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Well, I mean, obviously, we use the reaching starts in SailGP, and it's been a feature of the league since it started, and it's sort of a new addition. I mean, I guess we're in foiling boats, aren't we? Things have changed. The boats go so much faster. You've actually got to sail at a bit of a wider angle to the wind to accelerate to get up on the foils. We then kind of give Mark 1, so all the crews know we can go in a straight line towards Mark 1. There's no discrepancy in terms of we've got to go to that to where are we going to. You can see it's towards Mark 1, and then once you get to Mark 1, we end up, relatively speaking, spreading the fleet out a little bit to try and sort of alleviate the factor of these boats going quite so quickly. We're in a new age, Craig, and is that sort of some of the reasons you see for the reaching start?
Yeah, I mean the reach to start, essentially gives you who's leading the race pretty early on, and you've got people hopefully spread along the line. As we saw, there are some sides to it where things can get very tricky. A lot of manoeuvring needs to go on, so there's a lot of potentially difficult situations come up, but generally everyone is going in that same direction, and everybody knows that as you get to that start, that everyone's going to turn down. In this situation, if people are early, then they're trying to mitigate and go slower, and things can then happen. But overall, you've got a start where everybody's going in the same direction.
Yeah, that's right. But obviously, I sort of old school, if you like, as I know you are, Craigo. Really, at heart, we've got a bit of old school, and we're used to sort of starting off upwind. And I sailed a 49er. I was several sailing journalists definitely accused me of enjoying starting a race on port tack.
The upwind start, is not without its challenges, and you talk there about the port starboard approach. The quicker you can be going at start time, the better. When you hit that line and you start getting going in the direction of the first mark, so as you approach, you'll tend to, on an upwind start, put the bow down to get that speed on, and then you'll turn up late on in the piece. And if you're a right away boat, as you're changing direction, you've got to be giving others room to keep clear. Rule 16. And so anyone that's sitting there on port, knows that somebody else has got to give them a bit of room, but at the same time they are a keep clear boat. And then it's that final turn up, where you can have things where port tack boat thinks they're crossing, all of a sudden you've got to turn up, and then you've got to turn down, and that can turn into a very messy situation. You've also got people that maybe are starting above the line and then dip down at the last moment. So they're a windward boat, but they're dipping in to try and get back over the line, at that full speed to then be able to start. So whether you're reaching start, whether you're upwind start, it's not without its challenges.
No, and I think one thing that I find interesting, again, I'm sort of rocking it back, and but people that maybe have come to sail GP and then they're new to sailing. We're so used to seeing this pitch on the course, and we're so used to sort of seeing boundaries and what I would have called stadium racing. But I think one thing that strikes me as well is when we are on an upwind leg, if we have two or three boats heading into a boundary, then suddenly a boat that's not got the right of way because they'd be maneuvering onto port tack, wind over the left hand side of the boat. If they're within 80 meters, and you'll be able to talk me through this, Craig, but my basic understanding is if they're within 80 meters of that boundary, they can just turn onto port tack and they'd have the right of way, which is completely counterintuitive to normal sailing. And it flicks in like an instant of I'm inside that boundary, bang, I've now got the right of way, I can maneuver. But the second they leave the boundary, then they haven't got the right of way again. And if you've suddenly have 8 boats going in towards that boundary, that feels like a pressure point.
Yeah, absolutely. And the SailGP courses are pretty tight. And that's due to usually the local topography. So potentially 30 seconds, 35 seconds after the start, you're going to have that pinch point at the boundary, and there, if like you say, the inside boat, the one closest to the boundary there, can tack, and as the other boats are stacked up on starboard, they've then got to start looking at who can give room, and it comes at you really, really quickly. And it's it's a 90-degree turn there, and it's a hard turn. The boats won't be could hide a little bit in the boundary, but at the same time, your speed's going to decay, and then you're going to have people coming off the foils, and people having to tack away, and people just get caught. You go outside that boundary, and then suddenly you're caught on port. So it's not as straightforward as you think when you've got a lot of boats heading into there, and it's you're just moving that pinch point to a different part of the course. And that could be pretty tricky to unravel.
Yeah, I mean, certainly you can see why it's not an obvious choice in these fast boats, and so we come back to our reaching start, and there's obviously lessons to be learned. Well, I think what's interesting is actually in the Olympic Games, it's there is that change towards reaching starts, as you say, for the sort of, in some ways, the simplicity. We know we're aiming at that mark. All the boats or boards know where they're aiming, and specifically, I suppose I'm drawn to IQ foil. So that's a foiling windsurfer. My potential viewers will be used to seeing the windsurfers as super cool dudes on the beach, but it's actually at Olympic level. It's some serious high athleticism, and they have a slightly strange rule where at 30 seconds. In fact, Craig, you talk us about the rule, because this sounds too detailed for my knowledge.
Yeah. So again, reaching start recognise that you want people all going in the same direction, so they mandate that in the last 30 seconds, you need to be heading towards the first mark, essentially heading towards the first mark as you go through that start line, and you've got a course restriction to not sail above that, the course to that mark, and it's a direct course. If somebody else has to alter course to avoid contact, so it doesn't mean you're not allowed to sail above that direct course. You can still do that, but as soon as you start interacting with other boards, then you have to be on that course. So it
Oh,
also
Craig,
introduces
this sounds
some
right in your
grey.
sweet spot. There you go. I was waiting for the word, Craig. Oh, we're back into the grey. Yeah, talk. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, back into the grey. Did they have to? What did they have to do? At what point was it reasonable for them to take the action? So it's a good rule. It works for the IQ, so everybody really knows that everyone's heading towards that first mark. But the nuances of the rule could make it tricky. I think 30 seconds, if you applied it to SailGP, 30 seconds out would be a long way out. Maybe 5 seconds out. Maybe it's something that we could test. Would it work? Only a bit of testing would do, but it's not as straightforward as some people might think,
No,
that
and
everybody
I think
is
the
locked to that
interesting,
course.
yeah, and I think what's interesting, Craig, as well is that, and I keep coming back to with this conversation is it's very hard to make good decisions and accurate decisions if you can't see all the information quick enough and you haven't got that sort of that insight. So if you're on a windsurfer on your own, well, you can't look everywhere, can you? You just can't have your head looking everywhere to leeward, above, below, or whatever, because you're on your own. Whereas we haven't got that limitation in SailGP. We've got the potential for more people. So, yeah, I was going to ask you about what sort of changes we're looking at as we move on to Halifax and later in the season. And you mentioned the two people, but I mean, to me, the two people back seems obvious. I mean, I don't want to throw people under the bus, but I do think if you give elite athletes, people that are used to just doing whatever it takes to win, I personally would be saying, what makes my boat, what makes my car be the fastest it can be going into corner one? And the reality is, if you can have two people grinding rather than one, you're going to go faster in a straight line. You can move that big wing sail quicker, which makes the sail setting more accurate and drives you drives you fast towards Mark 1 quickest. But it's coming at the consequence of there not being the eyes at the back of the boat, Craig. So I'm intrigued by that, what you mentioned around, two people behind the wheel, or however exactly you worded it. I vote for that one.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess you're looking at it, and it's saying that we don't want you to compromise any safety, and so we really want you to be fundamentally having someone that's helping the driver to look out. If you got someone back there in that aft cockpit or thereabouts, they're able to keep informed with the driver. If you've got someone else
Well,
grinding
much
at the
like where
front,
Goody was in
looking.
that Brazilian boat, like if
Yeah,
you remember the onboard from right at the beginning of the show, and you could see Goody down there. He's got the full view that way. They've got comms to each other. They can talk as if they're standing next to each other. The fact that Martine and Paul can't see each other doesn't matter, because they can hear each other
yeah.
and get that across. So yes, that's perhaps an interesting bit.
Yeah, definitely. And so it just means that everyone knows that there's somebody there that is going to be helping the driver to look in all places at all times, which is fundamentally, we think, the reason why there was an incident on Sunday in New York,
Yeah.
because of people not keeping a good lookout.
Craig, as always, thanks so much. I mean, I think, well, once again, we've seen what a dynamic and fast reacting series SailGP has to be, and what the pressures the athletes are under in terms of the decision making. The changes in the rules in that pre-start, Craig, seem crazy, but yeah, I keep coming back to the fact of maybe we need to stranglehold these athletes a little bit and say, okay, guys, you can't go 100% all the time. We're going to limit you by holding you back and making you keep your eyes out a little bit more. So that's an interesting thing. Sounds like a few lessons will no doubt have been learned, and there's plenty to think about. I guess we're growing league, and we're learning, we're evolving, and that's part of the journey, isn't it? But the next part of the journey, June the 20th and 21st, is coming real quick. We're going to be in Halifax. It was an absolutely beautiful venue when we were back there in 2024. I can't wait to see the fleet racing. The Black Foils are back, and it's going to be action-packed. So yeah, looking forward to it. Come watch us there. Let's see who's going to be on top when we come away from Halifax.